My name is Maria Castellano. I'm 34 years old and I work as a pediatric nurse at a children's hospital in Albuquerque, New Mexico. For 18 months, I cooked and cleaned for my husband's entire family every single weekend, while his mother made sure there was never a chair left at the table for me. What none of them knew was that I was keeping a record of every dollar and every hour, and when I finally laid it on the table, it wasn't anger that changed everything. It was paper. Before I tell you how this ended, let me welcome you to this channel, a place where ordinary women face impossible situations inside their own families and come out the other side, not through yelling or revenge, but through patience, quiet documentation, and proof that cannot be argued with. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Let me know in the comments where you're watching this from, and if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to this channel. I should start by telling you who I was before all of this began. I grew up in Las Cruces, the only daughter of a single mother who cleaned houses for a living. I knew what hard work looked like before I ever picked up a stethoscope. I worked my way through nursing school at the University of New Mexico, and by the time I was 26, I was working nights in the pediatric unit, the kind of job where you hold a scared child's hand at 3 in the morning and somehow find the strength to smile for them. I met my husband, Daniel, at a coworker's barbecue. He was an electrician, steady and quiet, the kind of man who fixed things instead of talking about them. We got married 4 years ago in a small ceremony with just our closest people. His mother, Rosa, was polite that day, distant but polite. I told myself that was just her way. It wasn't until Daniel's older brother, Esteban, moved back to Albuquerque with his wife and 3 kids that I understood what Rosa's family really looked like up close. Rosa decided, without asking anyone, that Sunday dinners would now happen every single week at her house, and that I, as the newest daughter-in-law, would be the one responsible for making them happen. At first, I didn't mind helping. I told myself this was just what family does, that I was being welcomed in, even if the welcome felt more like an assignment. I drove to the grocery store every Saturday morning, bought everything for a meal that would feed 11 people, and spent my one day off each week chopping, simmering, and washing dishes in Rosa's kitchen while she sat in the living room with her sisters, sipping coffee. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was small. Dinner was ready, and I went to set my own plate at the table. Rosa looked at me and said, in front of everyone, that there wasn't enough room and that I should eat in the kitchen once everyone else had been served. I laughed it off. I told myself it was an honest mistake, that next week would be different. Next week was not different, nor was the week after that, nor the month after that. Every Sunday, I cooked a meal I never sat down to eat with the rest of them. I ate standing at the counter or sitting alone at the kitchen table after everyone else had moved to the living room. Daniel noticed sometimes, and he would bring me a plate at first, sitting with me for a few minutes before his mother called him back to the living room to settle some argument or watch a game. I want to be clear about something. Daniel was not a cruel man. He simply didn't see what I saw because he had grown up inside this pattern his entire life. To him, his mother's house ran a certain way, and questioning it felt disrespectful in a way I don't think he ever fully examined. I loved him too much, and I was too tired most weekends to make it into the fight it probably should have been from the beginning. Rosa's personality was the kind that people in her own generation called strong-willed, and people my age would call something else entirely. She had raised 3 children mostly on her own after her husband passed young, and she had built a kind of fortress around her household, with herself as the only person who got to decide what was fair. Esteban's wife, Carla, had learned early to simply go along with whatever Rosa wanted, and I watched her do it without complaint, which only made my own discomfort feel more isolating, like I was the only one who noticed anything strange about the arrangement at all. The grocery bills started adding up faster than I expected. feeding 11 to 13 people every week, with Rosa requesting specific brands, specific cuts of meat, specific imported ingredients for the dishes she liked best, meant I was spending close to $150 almost every Saturday. Nobody ever offered to pay me back, and nobody ever asked how much it cost. It was simply assumed that this was my contribution, my way of proving I belonged in this family. Around month 4, I started saving every single receipt. I told myself it was just for budgeting, a private habit, nothing more. I told myself I wasn't really keeping score. But some part of me, the part that had grown up watching my own mother get underpaid and overworked by people who assumed she had no other choice, knew exactly what I was doing. I was building something. I didn't know yet what I would do with it, but I knew I needed it to exist. By month 6, the pattern had fully calcified. Sunday became a day I dreaded instead of one I looked forward to. I would arrive at Rosa's house by 10 in the morning to start prepping, cook for hours, serve a meal I would not share, clean every dish and pot afterward, and drive home around 8 at night, exhausted, while Daniel stayed behind sometimes to have one more beer with his brother. I started tracking my hours on a notepad I kept in my purse, writing down arrival and departure times like I was clocking in and out of a job nobody had hired me for and nobody was paying. By month 9, I had stopped expecting anything to change on its own, and I started preparing for the possibility that I might need proof someday, even if I didn't yet know what kind of proof or for what purpose. I bought a small accordion folder from the office supply store near the hospital and started sorting my grocery receipts by date, slipping each one into its own labeled pocket. I kept my notepad of hours in the same folder, transferring my scribbled times into a clean spreadsheet on my laptop every couple of weeks, late at night after Daniel had fallen asleep. I want you to understand that I wasn't doing this out of spite. I genuinely believed for a long time that if I simply had enough evidence laid out clearly enough, Daniel would see the pattern the same way I did, and he would talk to his mother and things would shift. I was patient because I loved him, not because I enjoyed collecting grievances. But patience, I was learning, has a shelf life, especially when nothing on the other side of it ever changes. The warning signs from Rosa became sharper as the months went on. She began commenting on my cooking in front of the family, saying things like she hoped I'd finally learned how Daniel likes his rice, even though I had been making that rice exactly the way he liked it for over a year. She started inviting her sisters to help me in the kitchen, which really meant standing nearby and critiquing everything I did while I did all the actual work. Once, when I sat down for 2 minutes to rest my feet after 8 hours of cooking and cleaning, she asked in front of Esteban's children if I was tired from all this hard work of stirring a pot. Carla, Esteban's wife, pulled me aside in the bathroom one Sunday, around month 11, and told me quietly that she used to go through something similar years ago, before she simply stopped fighting it. She said Rosa had a way of making you feel like you were the problem if you ever pushed back, and that the family had a long memory for anyone who caused what Rosa called drama. Carla wasn't trying to discourage me, not exactly. I think she was warning me in the only way she knew how, while still protecting herself from getting involved. The real breaking point in terms of evidence came in month 13, when I was looking for a missing serving spoon in Rosa's kitchen drawer and found an old spiral notebook tucked beneath some plat mats. I wasn't trying to snoop, I was genuinely looking for a spoon. But when I opened it, out of simple curiosity, I found pages of Rosa's handwriting dated over the past year, listing out household contributions from each family member. Esteban's name appeared with amounts next to it, money he had apparently given his mother for rent and utilities, even though he lived in his own house. Carla's name appeared with notes about babysitting hours she'd done for Rosa's friends. And then I found my own name. Next to my name, Rosa had written only one thing: Repeated week after week. Maria, cooking, no contribution. Nothing about the money I spent. Nothing about the hours I worked. As if my labor and my groceries simply didn't exist. As if I was contributing nothing at all, while everyone else's sacrifices were being carefully recorded, and I would later learn, factored into who Rosa intended to favor when she eventually redrew her will. I closed the notebook, put it back exactly where I found it, and went back to making dinner with my hands shaking slightly, not from anger, but from the strange, clarifying relief of finally understanding the full shape of what I was dealing with. That night, I didn't say anything to Daniel. I wanted to be sure of what I had seen before I brought it into our marriage as a fact rather than a feeling. Over the following weeks, I started paying closer attention to small comments Rosa made about inheritance, about the house, about who she could count on. I never took the notebook, and I never photographed it because I didn't feel right about exposing something I'd found by accident in someone else's private drawer. But what I had read confirmed something I needed to know. This wasn't really about cooking or chairs at a table. It was about Rosa deciding, in writing, who counted as family that mattered, and who was simply useful. It was around this time that I started talking to my older cousin, Teresa, who worked as a family mediator in Santa Fe. I called her one night in month 14, not entirely sure what I was asking for, just needing to say the situation out loud to someone outside of it. Teresa didn't tell me to confront Rosa, and she didn't tell me to leave Daniel or to blow up at anyone. She asked me a simple question instead. She asked me what I actually wanted the outcome to be, separate from how angry or hurt I felt. I told her I wanted Daniel to see it, not just hear me complain about it, but actually see, in numbers, what 18 months of this arrangement had cost me, in money and in time, while I was excluded from the most basic acknowledgement of belonging at that table. Teresa told me that feelings get argued with, but numbers on a page are much harder to dismiss, and that if I wanted Daniel to truly understand, I needed to show him something he couldn't talk himself out of believing. She suggested I keep building exactly what I had already started, but to make it complete, organized, and undeniable, a full 18-month record, dated and itemized, ready to be seen all at once rather than described in pieces over time. So that's exactly what I did. Over the next 4 months, I finished compiling everything. Every grocery receipt scanned and dated, every hour worked logged in a clean spreadsheet with totals by month. I calculated that I had spent over $10,800 on groceries alone across 18 months and worked more than 700 unpaid hours cooking and cleaning for a family that wouldn't let me sit at their table. I printed it all out, neatly organized, in a folder I kept at the bottom of my closet, waiting for the right moment, not to attack anyone, but simply to finally be seen. The moment I had been quietly preparing for arrived sooner than I expected, and not in the way I had imagined. It was a Sunday in month 17, and I had just finished setting out a tray of tamales I'd spent 4 hours making from scratch, including masa I had ground myself because Rosa insisted store-bought masa tasted like cardboard. I went to grab a seat at the table the same way I always tried and failed to do, and this time Rosa didn't even bother with an excuse about space. She simply said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, that the kitchen table was for family and that I could eat after. Something about hearing it said so plainly, so casually in front of Daniel, in front of his brother, in front of the children who were watching to learn exactly how women get treated in this family, made the floor of my patience finally give out. Not with shouting, not with tears. I felt something settle in me instead, calm and clear, like a decision rather than an emotion. I said quietly that I understood, and I went to eat standing at the counter like I always did. But that night, driving home, I told Daniel I needed to talk to him about something important, and that I wanted his full attention when we got there. I want to explain what the turning point actually felt like, because it wasn't dramatic in the way you might expect. I didn't confront Rosa that night. I went home, and once we were sitting at our own kitchen table, the one I never had a problem being seated at, I asked Daniel a simple question. I asked him if he had any idea how much money I'd spent on groceries for his mother's house over the past year and a half. He guessed maybe $2,000, maybe $3,000. I told him the real number was over $10,800, and that I had documentation for every cent of it. I watched his face change as I said it. Not anger yet, just confusion. The look of someone doing math in his head and not liking where it landed. I told him I wasn't asking him to choose between me and his mother. I was asking him to look at something with me, honestly, before deciding anything. I went and got the folder from the closet, and I set it on the table between us. 18 months of receipts, hours and dates, organized the way I had built it, methodically, without a single word of exaggeration anywhere in it. Daniel went through it slowly, page by page, and I watched something happen in him that I had been hoping for almost a year and a half. He wasn't just reading numbers, he was recognizing, one Sunday at a time, every single dinner he remembered, every excuse he had quietly accepted for why I wasn't sitting beside him at his mother's table. When he reached the spreadsheet showing 712 unpaid hours, he closed the folder gently and sat back, and for a long moment he didn't say anything at all. He asked me why I hadn't told him sooner, and I told him the truth. That I had tried, in small ways, more than once, and that I had watched him absorb those moments and then quietly let them go because confronting his mother felt impossible to him. I told him I didn't build this folder to punish him, but because I needed him to see what 14 years of unquestioned family patterns looked like from the outside, in numbers he couldn't argue away with a memory of how things had always been. Daniel didn't promise anything dramatic that night. He simply said he needed to think, and he asked if he could keep the folder to look through again on his own. I said yes, because Teresa had told me something important weeks earlier, that the goal wasn't to win an argument in one night. It was to give Daniel room to arrive at the truth himself, rather than feeling cornered into agreeing with me just to end a conversation. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed Daniel becoming quieter around his mother on the phone, asking her pointed questions I'd never heard him ask before, like why dinner had to happen every single week instead of every other week, and why I never had a seat. Rosa, predictably, brushed him off at first, telling him he was overthinking something that had simply always worked fine. But Daniel, for the first time in our marriage, didn't accept that answer and let it go. He told me, about 10 days after that conversation at our kitchen table, that he wanted to bring it up properly, in front of the whole family, not to humiliate his mother, but because he felt like quietly fixing it between the two of them would let her simply deny that anything had really happened. He said he wanted me there when it happened, not in the kitchen, but at the table, with the folder, if I was willing. I told him I was, but only if it stayed calm, only if it was about facts and not about anger, because I had spent 18 months proving that patience and proof were stronger than yelling ever could have been. The following Sunday, I drove to Rosa's house with the same calm I had carried for 18 months, except this time the folder sat on the passenger seat instead of hidden in my closet. Daniel had asked Esteban and Carla to make sure everyone stayed at the table after the meal instead of scattering to the living room the way they usually did, telling them only that he had something he wanted to share as a family. Rosa assumed, I think, that it was good news, maybe even an announcement about a baby, and she seemed almost pleased as she gathered everyone together once the plates were cleared. I served the meal exactly as I always had, and for once I didn't mind standing at the counter while everyone ate, because I knew it was the last time this particular pattern would exist unspoken. When the food was finished and the children had been sent to the living room with a tablet to keep them occupied, Daniel asked me to come sit down at the table, in the chair beside him, the chair that had never once been mine. I sat down and I set the folder in front of me, unopened, waiting. Daniel spoke first, calmly, the way we had practiced. He said he wanted to talk about something that had been bothering him for a while, something he should have noticed much sooner than he had. He said that for the past 18 months, I had been cooking and cleaning for every single family gathering, and that I had never once been given a seat at this table until tonight. Rosa's expression shifted immediately, defensive, already preparing to explain that there simply wasn't enough room, the same excuse I had heard more times than I could count. This is the part where I spoke, and I want you to understand that my voice never rose above a normal conversational tone the entire time. I opened the folder and laid out the printed pages, one by one across the table where everyone could see them. I explained simply that over 18 months, I had spent $10,840 on groceries for this house and worked 712 hours cooking and cleaning, all of it unpaid, all of it unacknowledged, while being told nearly every single week that there wasn't room for me at the table I was filling with food. Rosa tried to interrupt twice, saying this was exaggerated, that family didn't keep score like this. I didn't argue with her. I simply pointed to the dates on the receipts, the itemized totals at the bottom of each month, the spreadsheet showing the running hours, and I let the number speak instead of raising my voice to compete with hers. Esteban, who I hadn't expected to say anything, went quiet and pale when he saw the total, and Carla wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, which told me she had likely done a similar quiet math in her own head over the years without ever writing it down. I told Rosa I wasn't asking for the money back, and I wasn't asking for an apology dressed up as a performance for the family. I told her I simply needed her and everyone at this table to understand that I had been carrying a financial and physical weight in this household for a year and a half while being treated as someone who didn't belong at the most basic level, a chair. I said I loved being part of this family and that I still wanted to be part of it, but that wanting something didn't mean I was willing to keep paying for it in silence. Rosa's response, to her credit, was not the explosion I had half expected. She sat very still for a long moment, looking at the papers rather than at me, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. She said she hadn't thought of it as unfair because in her mind, cooking was simply what daughters-in-law did, the way she herself had done it decades earlier for her own mother-in-law, without complaint, without anyone counting hours. She said seeing it written down so plainly made her feel, for the first time, like maybe she had simply repeated a pattern without ever asking whether it was right. It wasn't a complete transformation. Rosa didn't suddenly become warm or effusive, and I never expected her to. But 2 weeks later, dinner moved to every other Sunday instead of every single week, and a rotation was set up where Carla, Esteban, and I took turns hosting and cooking, with everyone contributing money toward groceries, regardless of whose house it was. The first time I sat down at that table, an actual chair pulled out for me before the meal even started, Rosa didn't say much, but she did pass me the rice first, before anyone else, which from her I understood to be its own kind of apology. Daniel and I talked a great deal in the months that followed about the patterns he had grown up inside without questioning, and about how easy it had been for him to let things slide simply because confronting his mother felt harder than absorbing my discomfort instead. He's not perfect now, and our marriage isn't some fairy tale fixed overnight, but he asks me every single week if something feels unfair before it has a chance to build into 18 months of silence again. What I learned through all of this is that you don't need to scream to be heard, and you don't need revenge to be respected. You need patience and you need proof, laid out so clearly that no one in the room can pretend it isn't true. I didn't win by punishing Rosa. I won by refusing to disappear. One receipt, one